The vast, cold darkness of space trembled as the Norvaxian Empire's armada descended upon Earth. Thousands of gleaming warships, each bristling with plasma cannons and ion disruptors, formed a blockade around the tiny blue planet. It was supposed to be a routine conquest, another primitive species crushed beneath the might of the Empire. Supreme War Admiral Rhinox leaned back in his command throne, tapping his clawed fingers against the armrest, watching the human homeworld through the reinforced viewport. "Pathetic," he muttered. His officers nodded in agreement. Humanity had barely stepped beyond their own moon, and their weapons were laughably outdated. When they had refused to surrender, Rhinox had expected Earth's governments to muster every soldier, every warship, every last shred of resistance to fight for their survival. But instead, they had sent this: a single transport shuttle. The Norvaxians watched in utter disbelief as the flimsy, outdated human vessel drifted toward their main battle station. No visible weapons, no fighter escorts, just a rusting bucket of a ship, held together by what Rhinox could only assume was sheer human stubbornness. And then the doors opened. Out walked the weakest, scrawniest group of soldiers Rhinox had ever seen. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Rethak, who was staring at the humans like they were some elaborate joke the universe had played on them. "Are they ill?" Rethak asked, his voice uncertain. Rhinox squinted at the ragtag group. "They must be their prisoners," he scoffed. "Perhaps they are surrendering in the most humiliating way possible." But then the first human stepped forward, if one could call it stepping. He more stumbled forward, adjusting the oversized helmet that threatened to slip down over his eyes. Sergeant Rick Skeletor Johnson was tall, lanky, and had the overall muscle mass of a damp paper towel. His uniform was slightly too big for his frame, making him look like a child who had stolen his dad's army gear. Next to him was Specialist Lisa Stringbean Hudson, a wiry, sarcastic woman who looked more at home behind a computer screen than on a battlefield. She rolled her eyes at the gathered Norvaxian soldiers, as if she were already bored. Then there was PFC Kyle the IT guy Spencer, a former help desk technician who still wore his thick-rimmed glasses and clutched a suspiciously old laptop like it was the key to survival. The Norvaxians simply stared. "Greetings, Norvaxian overlords," Sergeant Johnson said, his voice cracking mid-sentence. He cleared his throat and tried again. "We have come to, negotiate your surrender." For a moment, there was silence. Then laughter, deep, guttural, and all-encompassing. One of the larger Norvaxian officers actually had to lean against a console to keep himself from falling over. Another wiped a tear from his multi-eyed face. Rhinox, however, did not laugh. Something about this didn't sit right. "What is this?" he growled. "Where are your warriors? Where are your elite soldiers?" Lisa popped a piece of gum into her mouth and blew a bubble. "Oh, you mean the guys who lift weights and grunt a lot? Yeah, they're back home. We figured it wasn't fair to send them." Rhinox's eye twitched. "Not fair." Johnson nodded solemnly. "Yeah, you guys seem like you're at a serious disadvantage already." More laughter echoed through the command center, but this time, Rhinox didn't join in. Something felt off. These humans, though physically unimpressive, didn't seem afraid. They should be trembling, begging for their lives, overwhelmed by the sheer technological superiority before them. Instead, they looked annoyed. Then, before he could issue an order, alarms blared throughout the station. "Sir." One of the Norvaxian technicians turned in his seat, face twisted in confusion. "Our internal systems are malfunctioning." Rhinox's head snapped toward the screen. Tactical displays flickered. Weapons control panels rebooted. The station's shielding systems began rapidly turning on and off like a faulty light bulb. Lisa let out a low whistle. "Wow, that was fast." Rhinox turned back to the humans, his mind racing. "What did you do?" he hissed. Kyle, the IT guy, adjusted his glasses and held up his laptop. "Oh, nothing big. Just a little, systems optimization. Turns out your very advanced security software isn't compatible with Windows 98. So, yeah. Whole system's kinda confused right now." The command center erupted into chaos. officers scrambled to restore control, but the screens were now filled with flashing error messages. Error 404, weapons not found. Critical system failure. Insert floppy disk to continue. A Norvaxian officer slammed a fist against the console. Our targeting systems are locked in a boot loop. We cannot fire our weapons. Rhinox's rage burned hot. He whirled toward his soldiers. Then attack them manually, he bellowed. The towering, heavily armored Norvaxian warriors surged forward, energy staffs raised. The humans, however, simply stepped aside, just in time for the floor to collapse beneath the aliens. Lisa popped her gum again. Oh yeah, you might want to get some engineers to fix that. Turns out your fancy anti-gravity flooring doesn't do too well when you turn off gravity. From below, the Norvaxians' agonized howls echoed up through the station. Rhinox's mind reeled. This wasn't possible. This wasn't possible. These humans, they weren't warriors, they weren't trained assassins, they weren't anything special. And yet, they had crippled one of the Empire's strongest stations in less than an hour using nothing but human absurdity and outdated technology. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. This is a fluke, he growled. This is nothing. The Empire will. A deep rumble shook the station. A nearby officer checked his display and paled. Sir, they've hacked the reactor core. The station is losing power. Rapidly. Rhinox spun back toward the humans, veins bulging in his forehead. What have you done? Kyle held up his hands. Hey, it was an accident. I was just trying to check your Wi-Fi settings, but you guys have, like, 0 firewall protections, so I might have turned off your cooling system. Lisa nudged Johnson. Should we tell them about the grenade? Johnson scratched his head. Nah, let them figure that one out themselves. The station rocked again, metal groaning as its systems continued to collapse. Red emergency lights flared to life, and a robotic voice droned. Warning. Critical failure imminent. Evacuation advised. Rhinox took a step back, his vision tunneling. This was a nightmare. This was worse than a nightmare. This was humiliation. The humans stood before him, still grinning, still unimpressed, still so painfully human. And they had just delivered the single greatest loss the Norvaxian Empire had ever suffered. Lisa saluted him lazily. Well, it's been fun. We'd love to stay and chat, but we should probably go before this whole place goes boom. Johnson nodded. Yeah, you guys might want to work on that whole massive structural vulnerability thing. With that, the humans turned and strolled back toward their transport, leaving a room full of battle-hardened Norvaxian warriors utterly speechless. And as Rhinox watched the station systems fail one by one, he felt fear for the first time in his life. They weren't just fighting humans. They were fighting humans with Wi-Fi access. Supreme War Admiral Rhinox sat frozen in his command throne, staring at the flickering holographic reports in front of him. He had watched in horror as an elite Norvaxian military station, one of the finest the Empire had ever constructed, had collapsed into chaos, defeated not by overwhelming force, not by superior tactics, but by an assortment of physically unimpressive humans armed with a grenade, a laptop, and what could only be described as unchecked recklessness. The transmission from the battle station had cut off minutes ago, but the reports were still streaming in. The humans had hacked their systems. They had overloaded the reactor core. And now, a station worth trillions of Norvaxian credits was in ruins. His officers stood in rigid silence, as if fearing that even the smallest movement might provoke his wrath. Commander Rethak, his most trusted second-in-command, finally broke the suffocating quiet. We should order an immediate counterstrike, Rethak said, though his voice carried none of its usual confidence. We will send our death commandos to wipe them out before they can. A sharp, metallic beep interrupted him. The Imperial War Council was calling. Rhinox forced down the rage boiling inside him and accepted the transmission. The air shimmered as Grand Overlord Vrexen's image materialized. The supreme leader of the Empire stood tall, his ridged brow furrowed, his golden robes catching the dim light of the war chamber. His multiple eyes fixated on Rhinox with a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt. Admiral, Vrexen said slowly, the weight of the entire empire pressing down on the single word. I trust there is a reasonable explanation for why I have just received word that a handful of underfed humans have crippled one of our finest military installations. Rhinox's throat tightened. My lord, we underestimated them. A tense pause followed. We underestimated humans. Vrexen repeated, each word dripping with venom. A species so primitive they only recently discovered interstellar travel. A species whose most decorated warriors are not even in the fight. Rhinox had no rebuttal. Vrexen exhaled sharply. Very well. I assume you have already initiated an appropriate response. Rhinox straightened. Yes, my lord. We will deploy our elite Death Commando Legion to eliminate them immediately. See that you do, Vrexen said coldly. Because if one more report crosses my desk stating that we are being humiliated by a race that eats artificially flavored cheese powder, I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your days cleaning latrines on the outer colonies. The transmission cut off. Rhinox exhaled, willing his pulse to steady. Rethak cleared his throat. Orders, Admiral? Rhinox's jaw clenched. Deploy the Death Commandos. No mercy. The Norvaxian Death Commandos were the Empire's most feared warriors, bred and trained in the most brutal environments known to the galaxy. Their exosuits were lined with reactive plating, their weapons crafted with precision to tear through the toughest armor. The humans, meanwhile, were navigating their stolen Norvaxian shuttle using an outdated GPS app on Kyle's phone. Dude, how are we lost? This thing literally has a galactic map, Lisa groaned, slumped in the co-pilot seat. Kyle frowned at his screen. Look, the GPS keeps saying recalculating. I think it's because your grenade knocked out the station's satellite system, which also controlled our navigation. Johnson pinched the bridge of his nose. So, let me get this straight. We just accidentally disabled an entire enemy fleet's tracking network. Kyle blinked. Yeah. A long silence stretched in the cabin. Nice, Lisa said, nodding approvingly. Before Johnson could process the absurdity of the situation, a proximity alarm shrieked through the cockpit. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a fleet of Norvaxian dropships descending from orbit. Johnson's stomach sank. Guys, Kyle whispered. I think we just pissed them off. The Death Commandos deployed in perfect synchronization, landing in a crushing wave of armored might. Their leader, a towering brute known as Commander Gravox, surveyed the battlefield with a sneer. Unlike Rhinox, he had no patience for honor, no concern for strategy beyond brute force. They are weak, Gravox growled. This will be over in minutes. Then he took a step forward and immediately slipped on something. His massive form crashed to the ground with an undignified thud. A high-pitched, mechanical beep came from beneath him. He rolled over, groaning, and stared at the offending object. It was a yellow sign with a stick figure slipping. A wet floor sign. Lisa poked her head around a corner. Oh hey, it worked. Gravox barely had time to snarl before a torrent of coffee spewed from a hacked vending machine, scorching his exposed sensors. He roared in agony as more of his warriors charged in, only to be met with a minefield of strategically placed banana peels. One soldier slipped and crashed into another, triggering a domino effect that sent half the battalion sprawling into a pile of tangled limbs and cursing. Johnson clutched his stomach, wheezing. Are we actually winning with this? Lisa grinned, twirling a screwdriver. Oh, we haven't even gotten to the best part. Above them, the station's security drones flickered to life, their programming hijacked by Kyle's relentless tinkering. A chorus of synthesized voices filled the battlefield. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Kyle gave a satisfied nod. Full spectrum Rickroll achieved. Gravox's helmet speakers blasted the ancient human song directly into his skull. His howls of rage turned to screams of pure psychological torment. Rhinox, still monitoring from his warship, could only watch in horror. This wasn't war. This wasn't even a battle. This was absolute humiliation. The Death Commandos had never lost a single engagement in the history of the Empire. And now they were writhing in confusion, slipping on Earth's most basic hazards, and being mentally broken by a long-forgotten Earth meme. The transmission feed was still active. He could hear his warriors screaming over the relentless lyrics of a song first recorded in 1987. Rhinox slammed his fist against the control panel. "Vrexen is going to kill me." A new alert flashed across the display. "Warning. Foreign system interference detected." His blood ran cold. Lisa turned back to Johnson with a wicked grin. "So, funny story. While Kyle was rickrolling them, I may have hacked into their warship." Johnson narrowed his eyes. "Define hacked." Let's just say their shields might be totally off." "Lisa. And their weapons might be, aiming at each other now." Johnson blinked. "You hacked a warship in the middle of battle?" Lisa shrugged. "What can I say? I multitask." Back on the Norvaxian command deck, Rhinox stared at his now useless fleet, completely paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of what was happening. This was no ordinary war. This was humanity in its purest, most chaotic form. And the Empire was not prepared. The Norvaxian Empire was unraveling. What had started as a routine conquest had spiraled into an existential crisis, all because of one transport ship full of misfits armed with nothing but outdated technology, sarcasm, and an alarming level of accidental genius. Reports of their failures spread like wildfire through the Empire. Some commanders dismissed it as exaggeration until they saw the footage. Norvaxian warlords slipping on banana peels, battle-hardened commandos collapsing under a surprise rickroll assault, and entire fleets crippled by the power of Windows 98 malware. For the first time in centuries, the invincible Norvaxian war machine hesitated. Johnson stood on the bridge of their newly commandeered warship, a vessel so advanced that even the human military had never seen its equal. The fact that it was now controlled by a bunch of underfunded Earthlings with a talent for causing chaos made it all the more hilarious. Lisa leaned against the console, scrolling through the Norvaxian battle network, her fingers dancing across the controls like she was browsing an online shopping sale. "So, funny thing," she said, popping her gum. "Turns out, when I messed with their security systems, I kinda accidentally gave us control over their entire orbital defense grid." Johnson blinked. "Define entire." Lisa grinned. "Like the whole thing. We could technically nuke their homeworld from here." Kyle pushed up his glasses. "I mean, we're not going to do that, right?" Lisa groaned. "Of course not, nerd. But we are going to make them sweat." With a few keystrokes, she sent a galactic-wide transmission. The Norvaxian High Command, their entire war council, their emperor himself, all received the same message at once. It was a gif of a cat knocking over a glass of water, and then a single line of text appeared beneath it. "Oops. Did I do that?" The Norvaxians panicked. Across the Empire, fleets scrambled to reposition. Generals shouted conflicting orders. Advisors suggested immediate surrender. But the Emperor refused to believe that a species known for deep-frying butter had somehow become an existential threat to their civilization. Rhinox, once a proud war admiral, now stood in disgrace, staring at the chaos his own failures had wrought. He turned to Rethak, his voice laced with despair. "They've hijacked our war network. They've crippled our armies. And they're taunting us with domestic animals." His hands clenched into fists. "Rethak, how do we defeat an enemy like this?" Rethak, still reeling from the mental scars of being rickrolled, whispered the only logical answer: "We don't." Meanwhile, on the warship, Kyle frowned at his screen. Guys. Small problem." Lisa didn't look up. "Define small." Kyle turned the display toward them, revealing a massive fleet inbound from Norvaxian-controlled space. "Looks like they're sending everyone this time." Johnson exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He wasn't a soldier. He had never seen himself as a leader. But for some reason, the fate of Earth now rested on his ability to outthink an entire empire. Lisa cracked her knuckles. "Well, guess we better do something stupid." Kyle sighed. "This is going to be so stupid, isn't it?" Lisa grinned. "The stupidest." The battle began before the first shots were even fired. Lisa used their control over the Norvaxian fleet's internal communications to flood their screens with deliberately bad tactical advice. Officers on different ships were given conflicting orders. Some were told to retreat, others to attack, and at least one battleship received instructions to fly directly into a nearby asteroid. Johnson and Kyle took control of the ship's energy weapons, but instead of firing, they hacked into the Norvaxian targeting system and reversed it. Suddenly, enemy warships were firing on each other, convinced they were under attack from invisible enemies. The fleet descended into pure anarchy. And then Lisa unleashed the final blow, an overloaded signal burst that triggered an emergency protocol in every Norvaxian warship. A single message flashed across every console in the enemy fleet. System error. Please restart your ship to continue. And like clockwork, half the fleet powered down, leaving them completely defenseless. Kyle's mouth fell open. Did we just... Johnson finished the sentence for him. Win. Lisa cackled. Oh, hell yeah, we did. The battle was over before it even started. The remaining Norvaxian ships, seeing their comrades literally rebooting mid-fight, began to flee en masse. Their legendary warships, once feared across the stars, were now abandoning the battlefield like a pack of terrified interns on their first day at work. Back on the Norvaxian homeworld, the Emperor watched in absolute horror. The Norvaxians were not losing to humanity's greatest warriors. They were losing to humanity's leftovers, a group of misfits who had stumbled their way through battle, armed with duct tape, internet memes, and a complete disregard for common sense. For the first time in recorded history, the Empire surrendered, not because of superior firepower, not because of overwhelming tactics, but because they simply couldn't comprehend how these humans kept winning. Rhinox, standing in disgrace before the Emperor, whispered, "What do we do now?" The Emperor's many eyes narrowed. "We surrender." The message was sent. Across the galaxy, Norvaxian fleets powered down. Warships stood still, and the entire Norvaxian government sent a single, unified transmission to Earth. A video message of the Emperor himself, his grand robes slightly disheveled, his expression one of pure exhaustion. "Please, just stop. You win." Lisa, still chewing her gum, glanced at the screen. "Well, that was easy." Johnson rubbed his face. "I think we just accidentally conquered an empire." Kyle let out a long breath. So, what do we do with an empire?" Lisa smirked. "I dunno, but I bet we can make it way more fun." The war was over, and Earth had won. A strange silence settled over the galaxy. Where once Norvaxian warships had blotted out stars, where planets trembled at the mere mention of their empire, now there was only the unmistakable weight of defeat. Not just any defeat, an incomprehensible, soul-crushing, reality-shattering defeat. The invincible war machine of the Norvaxians, a civilization that had ruled for centuries, had collapsed not to an armada, not to a superweapon, but to a handful of humans who, by all accounts, had no business winning anything. And yet here they were. Johnson stood on the bridge of their newly acquired flagship, once the jewel of the Norvaxian Empire, now a glorified trophy that humanity didn't even know what to do with. The official message of surrender had come through hours ago, but the absurdity of it all still hadn't sunk in. Lisa leaned against the console, spinning in her chair, unbothered by the magnitude of their victory. So just to recap, we came out here expecting to get our asses kicked, and instead, we've somehow become the accidental rulers of a galactic empire. Kyle adjusted his glasses, still scrolling through the endless streams of diplomatic requests and surrender documents clogging the ship's communication network. Yeah, and it turns out running an empire is way more paperwork than I thought. Johnson exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to, hell, I don't even know, annoy them, delay them. He gestured at the massive viewport, where entire Norvaxian fleets now sat in passive formation, awaiting orders from their new, thoroughly confused overlords. Now, we have an empire. Lisa popped her gum. Well, maybe we should do something with it. Kyle blinked. Like what? We're soldiers, not politicians. Lisa smirked. Dude, Have you seen politicians? If they can do it, so can we. But before anyone could respond, the ship's communication terminal beeped. The incoming transmission bore a familiar insignia, Norvaxian High Command. With a hesitant glance at the others, Johnson accepted the call. A battered, visibly exhausted Emperor Vrexen appeared on the screen. The once imposing ruler of the most feared empire in the known galaxy now looked like a man who had not only lost a war, but had been forced to sit through 100 hours of human office meetings immediately afterward. Human rulers, Vrexen began, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who had given up. I come before you not as an enemy, but as a servant of reality. The empire is yours. We recognize your overwhelming superiority, and I simply ask one thing. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. You want to keep your job? Vrexen exhaled slowly. No, he rubbed his temples, muttering something in his native tongue that likely translated to an extremely colorful insult. I want to know how you did it. The question caught them off guard. Vrexen leaned forward, multiple eyes narrowing. How? How did your ridiculous tactics succeed? How did a species that relies on GPS to walk through a shopping mall take down the greatest military force in existence? What? His voice wavered. What are you? For a moment, the humans exchanged glances. Then Johnson leaned forward. We're human. Vrexen scowled. I know that. Johnson smiled. No, you don't. He sat back in his chair, folding his arms. You guys look at war and see power. You see fleets, weapons, technology, numbers. You think strength wins wars. Kyle gestured at the ship around them. You guys are so advanced that you never had to improvise. Never had to survive without your perfect systems. You never had to deal with traffic at 7 a.m. or a coffee machine that breaks at the worst possible time. Or, I don't know, Windows updates. Lisa leaned in, grinning. We don't win because we're stronger. We win because we're stubborn, chaotic, and too damn petty to lose. Vrexen said nothing for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and let out the longest, most exhausted sigh the galaxy had ever heard. I hate this, he muttered. Lisa nodded sympathetically. Yeah, we get that a lot. The Emperor relinquished full control of the Empire shortly after, declaring himself permanently retired from war and immediately taking up a job as a bartender in the Outer Rim. Most of the surviving Norvaxian warlords followed suit, realizing that trying to fight humanity was essentially an elaborate form of self-humiliation. The few that remained attempted to stage a counter-rebellion, only for their top general to accidentally surrender when a human negotiator distracted him with a card trick. And so, for the first time in history, Earth was at the center of a galactic empire. It took less than 2 weeks for chaos to break out. The United Nations had no idea how to govern an empire that spanned thousands of planets. Various human governments immediately argued over who got what, before accidentally giving control of an entire sector to a particularly aggressive Reddit moderator. Lisa, now holding an official diplomatic position, rewrote the empire's laws mostly as a joke, which resulted in Mondays being legally canceled, all wars being required to be settled with Mario Kart, Taco Tuesday being made a mandatory intergalactic holiday. Despite this, the galaxy thrived. Planets once controlled by the Norvaxians flourished under the new, weirdly relaxed human leadership. Galactic trade boomed, interstellar crime plummeted, and for the first time in recorded history, no major war broke out for over a decade. It turned out that an empire ruled by humans wasn't efficient, but it was weirdly fun. One day, as Lisa, Johnson, and Kyle sat aboard their flagship, watching as diplomats struggled to explain Earth customs to an entire galaxy, Kyle let out a sigh. I still can't believe we run an empire. Johnson shook his head. We don't run it. We accidentally run it. There's a difference. Lisa grinned. Well, either way, it's ours now. She raised her coffee mug. To humanity. Kyle raised his drink. To complete and total galactic nonsense. Johnson smirked. To the dumbest, most accidental victory in history. They clinked their mugs together, and the galaxy, confused, chaotic, and now permanently under Earth's questionable leadership, marched into a new era. An era ruled not by strength, not by power, but by the unstoppable force that was human absurdity.